Hey, hello everybody, welcome back. It's been a little couple months since I last did a video, it's just because I got a bit busy. So today is going to be my wrap up for both March and April. So without further ado, let's go. So I started off March by reading The Floating World, which was a proof I received. I believe this book's just come out this week actually, so if you're just picking up a copy, it is now available. This is written by Axie O, who, if you've read The Girl Who Fell Beneath the Sea, that's the same author. And this is the first in fantasy duology, following two main characters. You've got our main character Ren, who is a travelling acrobat whose family is attacked by demons. And we have Sunho, who is an ex-soldier who has had amnesia and cannot remember the last 2 years of his life and is trying to find his brother, who he only has vague recollections of. And like I said, Ren's family is attacked by a demon, and this provokes her to sort of go on a journey to find a cure for her uncle, who was injured by the demon, and that is how her path crosses with Sunho, and they end up sort of just going on this journey together to try and help each other reach their respective goals. I believe it's actually supposed to be a retelling of, or like inspired by mythology of celestial maidens and stuff like that. So we had some really interesting world building here with the floating world versus the sort of like undercity and stuff. But I have to say, I think this was maybe a sort of like a 3 stars for me. You know, as many things I liked about it as I didn't. It had some very interesting ideas, and I really did like the world building. But I would say it wasn't as developed, I think, as much as I would have liked, and I felt like I'd seen a lot of these kinds of like plot beats and ideas before. Whilst the world building and sort of things like that was very original, the characters and the general kind of like plot ideas kind of didn't really feel that original. So it very much felt like sort of like, okay, I've kind of seen this done before. And I feel like there just maybe wasn't as much time spent with just certain elements of the characterizations and certain elements of the plots we kind of skimmed by or just didn't spend as much time with as I particularly would have liked. So an enjoyable read, but I don't think it's a duology I'm particularly interested in continuing. I then read Clear, which was one of the books of the month for work. I believe it was the Scottish book of the month. And this is a very short, this is a couple of 100 pages sort of story, and it is set during the time of the Scottish Highland clearances, specifically following our main character John, who is a priest who is sent to an island to evict the last remaining inhabitant of that island, a man called Ivan, because John is very much looking for money. He's trying to support his new wife and stuff like that, and he's getting paid quite well by the owner of the island to basically be the middleman and tell that this gentleman Ivan that he needs to leave the only home he's ever known. If you don't know much about the Scottish Highland clearances, it was a time in Scottish history when a lot of the lairds, and particularly the Duke of Sutherland, is a bit of a villain in Scottish history, decided that the Scottish people living in the islands and living up in the Highlands needed to be moved out of their crofts and out of their villages to make way for sheep, because they just thought that was going to be far more efficient, and they just didn't. Honestly, I'm not as I'm honestly not read up on this particular subject as I perhaps would have liked to be. Basically, they all kind of got burned out of their homes because some rich fuck somewhere decided that no, they weren't making him enough money living on his land. So it's a period of Scottish history that I don't think is talked about enough, considering that it's the reason for why the Highlands and the mountains aren't as inhabited as they perhaps would be now if this hadn't happened, if entire communities and families and generations of families hadn't been forced to leave where they'd always lived. And it's also why we have a lot of expats. It's why a lot of Scottish people ended up moving to Canada and America in the 1800s, because there was no more space for them in the coastal towns. There were no jobs, because the crofters and the villagers and the shepherds and stuff, there was no work for them because everyone got moved out of the Highlands. They all got shoved to the coastline and stuff. So it's a very, very interesting period of Scottish history, a very traumatic period of Scottish history. So if you don't know that much about it, I would recommend looking into it. It's very, very interesting, and very much affects where the country has ended up and stuff like that. And like I said, not really talked about enough. Clear is an incredibly good snapshot into this, I think, particularly with the fact that it looks at an island settlement rather than the Highlands. And one thing I really like that we see in this book is the communication barrier between John and Ivan, because Ivan, having grown up basically isolated on this island with, to begin with, only his family really until he was the last one left, he doesn't speak English, nor does he speak Scots. He speaks his own dialect, removed from the Gaelic, removed from the Scots, with Nordic influences and things like that. So John, he's already going to this isolated island to tell Ivan that he needs to leave, and he does not have the words or the language to be able to do it. So when John gets there and suffers an accident and loses all of his notes and this attempt at a translation, he has to basically try and find a way to tell the man that is now looking after him and caring for him after his accident that he needs to leave the only home he has ever known. It's very tense, and you as the reader, you see chapters from both Ivan and John's point of view. So you're clued in the entire time as to what's going on in both of their heads, but they're obviously not, so you're in with that dramatic irony. And I think it's just done very, very well to see the story unfolding. And whilst we're perhaps in on what the miscommunication is and stuff, you're understanding why it's happening, because, you know, they cannot communicate. They are trying to learn how to communicate with one another. I could go on about this book all day. It is so, so good. Really enjoyable. Like I said, it packs a powerful punch because it's only 200 pages long, but it's so good. And yeah, just highly recommend it. It's a really, really good historical fiction novel. I then read Heavenly Tyrant. This is the sequel to Iron Widow, which you may remember was a big, huge viral hit in 2019, 2020. I can't remember when it came out. And this has been quite a delay getting to this one, but my god, it was worth the wait. I feel like this was such a good follow-up to Iron Widow. If you don't know the basic premise, it's basically like Pacific Rim had a baby with Chinese history and throw in a lot of female rage, and you get this series. It's so fun. It's just such an interesting idea, and I really, really loved the first book. Really excited for the second book. It moves the story in such an interesting place. I feel like that's one thing I find with a lot of sequels these days. Is like, often on their own, I'm often not like, oh yeah, that was such a good book. But within the wider context of the series and where it gets the story to go, amazing. And that's what Heavenly Tyrant does. There are so many things that, I mean, Zhe Shan's character in this book is just, she's going through so much, especially after what happened at the end of Iron Widow and the fallout of that and stuff. And you really do sympathise with her just trying to survive in the position she has now found herself in with a certain character who is brought in at the end of the last book. And seeing her make the decisions that she does, and then seeing where the plot takes her and stuff, it was such an interesting ride, really. Like, it's kind of hard to talk about without talking about spoilers, but obviously I'm trying to keep this spoiler free. They like the authors, they tease you with stuff you want from the first book, but they don't give it to you. So it really feels like, I don't know, carrot and a stick, but mostly just carrot, because you're like, no, I want to see that, but you have to wait. And I can't wait for the third book because, well, I'm not making much sense. I just really enjoyed this. I then read Wakenhurst by Michelle Paver. Michelle Paver is one of my all-time favourite authors. She wrote the Wolf Brothers series, which has just been living in my heart ever since I read it. And this was a book of hers that I believe is an adult sort of gothic horror-esque kind of historical fiction novel. So very, very different from the children's series of Wolf Brother. I would say it's not really the kind of thing I tend to read. I was reading just to sort of see what else this author is able to do, especially ahead of her release of, I think it's called Rainforest, maybe? Or is that cat? No. Yes, I think it's called Rainforest, coming out later this year. So I wanted to see what else this author could do before I dive into that book when it comes out. And you're following your main character of Maud. You're following Maud, who, lives in a big old house in the marshes, and basically it's about her relationship with her father, especially with how that relationship develops after her mother dies. And, it's kind of hard to describe without giving anything away. Her father is quite well known in sort of like, say in the present. He's very well known as having just randomly woken up one day and murdered one of the members of staff on the property. And what this is you start off with a journalist trying to sort of find out a little bit more about it and sort of, find that new story. And then we get to a different journalist who goes and speaks to Maud, and she gets Maud's side of the story and the lead up and the context as to what happened and what drove Maud's father to behave the way that he did. Very, very interesting imagery that you see with angels and demons, and particularly with femininity and womanhood and stuff like that, which is very interesting, because when I was doing research for my dissertation, I was doing some sort of contextual research about Victorians and how they treated women. And there were some very interesting books that I read about, I believe it was called Women and the Devil or something like that, and it was called this idea of like Victorianization idealization of women as angels and stuff like that. And I feel like that a lot of that bleeds into here for the cultural and time context of the setting. So that was really fun for me, was sort of seeing like, oh, I actually kind of know what this is all about because I actually researched for that for my dissertation. Yeah, interesting read. Would be a hard sell, I think, though. Like if someone came in and was like, hey Mary, you're a bookseller, sell this book to me, I would actually kind of struggle because it's like, it's gothic, but it's not quite horror, but it is, and it's not quite fantasy, but it is. Yeah, one of those weird ones that kind of just like, it's a spooky book, I would say. Okay, and then the last book I read in March was Oathbound by Tracy Dion. This is book 3 in the Legendborn cycle. If you don't know Legendborn, first of all, what rock have you been living underneath? Second of all, it is a modern urban fantasy retelling or inspiration of Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table in the modern times, fighting against the demons, and our main character, Bree, after losing her mother in a car accident, ends up getting involved in the secret society because she believes it has something to do with her mother's death, and everything very much goes from there. This series is so good. Book 1 was just explosive. Book 2 just, again, is one of those ones that gets the story into a really interesting place. So Oathbound is just go, all systems go from the get-go. It goes in such an interesting place. The characterization, I mean, Bree just continues to be an incredible main character, just doing the best she can with the lot she's been given. And like, a lot of what this series deals with is grief and how you move through your grief and stuff. And again, that is just so prevalent in this book. I really liked the new characters that we saw. I really liked that we saw a little bit more from Nick's point of view as well as from Will's point of view. He's definitely becoming a big favourite character for me. Like I said, it's the third book in the series. It's kind of hard to talk about it without like giving away too many spoilers, but just generally a really good place for this story to continue going. That cliffhanger, oh my god, I can't believe this. Oh my goodness, like that. I need the next book now. Okay, and then on to April. So I read quite a lot of books in April. I had a week off, so it's basically spent most of that week reading. I started off with reading Rivers in the Sky by Ayla Shafak. That was one of our fiction books of the month at work, and it was one I was interested in reading. I think I'd bought a copy of it for my friend, and since then I've been like, oh yeah, I should probably actually also read this. So when I saw we were going to get a hold of a few copies, I was like, there we go, that's my chance. Interesting idea. So you're basically following multiple characters across different time zones, timelines and stuff, and how they're all basically connected by the Epic of Gilgamesh and how it kind of just affects their life and how ancient Mesopotamia affects their modern day lives and stuff like that. It's kind of hard to explain, really. You know, you're following in 2014 a young girl who is from the Yazidi people in Iraq, and she is just trying to be baptized, but her family are currently kind of getting pushed out of where they live and things like that. You've got Arthur, who is in the 1800s, and he is a young boy born to the slums, and he has basically eidetic and photographic memory and stuff. And when he gets a position with the museum, he sort of starts to try and translate some archaeological finds that they have brought over from ancient Mesopotamia. You've then also got another character in modern times, can't quite remember her name, Zakila, that's it, Zakila. And she is just off of the back of leaving her husband. She's just starting out on her own and trying to find her feet. And you switch between these three main characters sort of quite consistently, and you sort of see how they're all affected by water, how they're all affected by rivers, and also, just like I said, the sort of through line of the Epic of Gilgamesh and how it affects each of their lives. And then as well, you also see how they all sort of connect to each other across the timeline, across the time. I would say I did want a lot more character development and character focus from this book. I feel like it was very much plot driven, even though the characters were the focus of it. It was kind of like a really weird mix. The pacing felt a bit off, and there, like I said, there wasn't as much depth to certain plot points as I wanted there to be. There was a few sort of stuff I was like, that's a pretty major thing that's going on there, and we're just gonna move past it. Okay, we're just gonna move past it, right? Okay. So yeah, 3 stars for me. You know, as many things I liked about it as I didn't like about it. I feel like I did kind of hype it up in my head a little bit too much, so that probably didn't help. And I feel like it took quite a while to get to the point. Once we got there, I did appreciate, you know, the build up and sort of just the things that had been laying and stuff. But yeah, I was saying for quite a while when I was reading it to my colleagues, I was like, yeah, waiting for it to get to the point. I then read All the Colours of the Dark. This was our thriller book of the month. This is written by Chris Whitaker, following a young boy who is abducted from his town and is kept in a dark room where he cannot see anything. You know, it's completely pitch black, and he is only aware of the other person being kept prisoner there, a girl called Grace, and how they basically keep one another company until eventually he is rescued. Grace vanishes. They never and they believe they've caught the person who did it to him, and he spends the rest of his life trying to find out what happened to Grace, whether she was real, whether she was a figment of his imagination, or if she was real, and what the man who'd taken him and her did to her, whether he killed her or whether she was somewhere else. So you're following our main character Patch, and you're following his best friend, whose name I can't quite remember off the top of my head. I want to say Sadie. I don't think it is. And basically how they grow up and how Patch's experience as a child affects him so much into his life. How it affects his best friend because she never gave up looking for him and stuff. Yeah, just very, very interesting concept, sort of seeing them grow up whilst Patch basically spends the rest of his life trying to find Grace. The plot and the characters did keep me going. I really liked both of our main characters. I did really like the concept. I thought it was fascinating, but the writing style and the pacing really put me off, my God. I'm not the biggest fan of like reading crime books and stuff because I'm not a fan of the short chapters, short sentences. The flow and the pacing just loses me every single time. But like I said, the plot and the characters did keep me going. I liked the overall story, I liked the overall characters, but I did not like the writing, and the pacing was just when I felt like we got into a rhythm, we had a time skip, or we had the rhythm was lost and things like that. So like, yeah, mixed feelings, but overall enjoyable read. And then read Emberclaw by L.R. Lamb. This is the sequel to Dragonfall, which follows our main character Arcady, who's basically trying to steal enough money to be able to afford tuition to go to university. Accidentally summons a dragon from the sort of like realm of the dragons and stuff, and has to work with said dragon, whilst not knowing that they're a dragon, to steal money and work out why they are connected to one another. Emberclaw picks up where we left off from the end of Dragonfall, with certain revelations and things that happen at the end of that book. I really, really liked this duology as a whole. I really think Emberclaw just ups the stakes a little bit more, ups the ante, and I really liked just seeing where our characters went. And it was really interesting as well reading this one after having been to a talk by the author where they talk about their inspirations and how they approach the narrative style, because the narrative style on this book is so cool because you have first person, second person directed, and that third person working in concert together. You get first person from Arcady's point of view because they are writing down, what happened to them and stuff. You get second person direct, which is Everin basically writing a great big long love letter to Arcady. And then you've got third person when you were starting to follow a third character that's introduced in the first book, and them talking about their idea, like, what happened to them and stuff, but in third person. Because everything is like a collection of stories and stuff that is being put together by a archivist later on in the future to try and tell the story of what happened between the humans and the dragons and stuff. Really, really clever, really, really interesting, and such a great follow-up. It absolutely lived up to the hype that I had for it. I loved the way the story went. I loved how it concluded. I liked how Arcady and Everin's relationship developed. If you haven't read Dragonfall as well, it's a super queer normative world. Arcady is a non-binary main character, and the world that they live in and stuff is just so accepting and queer normative, and I just love seeing that sort of stuff, and I loved seeing all the representation in this book as well. So it was so good. I then read Heir of Storms, which is going to be the young adult book of the month for Waterston's next month, I believe. I actually picked this copy up at the Mystic Fate Crown and Dagger ball that I went to because the author was there. I think they were part of like the sponsorship and stuff, so I do actually have, she is signed, beautiful little copy, and the author's lovely, by the way. So this had been hyped up for me, especially by the team at the Mystic Fate ball. They were sort of saying, this is like back when you first started reading YA fantasy, this is going to absolutely get you feeling that way. I do have to admit, 3 stars going towards 2.5 stars for me. I feel like if I'd read this like 10 years ago, I would have absolutely fucking loved it. But my problem with a lot of YA books is they're either hit or miss. Like there's no in between for me, and unfortunately this was a miss. It kind of almost feels like Throne of Glass had a baby with 12th Keeper. And those are both books that I liked, like the first one of them, and hated the rest of the series. So like, interesting stuff with the world building, really interesting stuff with the magic and the idea. And I did like the plot and things like that, but I feel like the characters just were very superficial, kind of similar to the Floating World. I've seen it before. A lot of the plot beats I have seen before. There was like this one plot twist that I thought, nice, that was original, but that was kind of it. You've got your two princes, you've got the golden boy and the bad boy, and she's caught between them. Like, it's very 2013 YA. Would have been a massive fucking hit 10, 12 years ago, but I am very interested to see how it's going to do in today's market. Yeah, like I said, interesting world building, really, really cool idea of like the elemental sort of magic, but in terms of characterization and the overarching plot, I have seen this done before, unfortunately. I then read The Witch release by Annalise Averley, and this is this month's Waterson's YA Book of the Month. This was so much fun. It is like Bridgerton, but with witches. You've got your sort of like Regency era sort of society, they're witches, and instead of going to balls and being debutantes and stuff to get a love match, you're trying to find a magic match, because the way the magic works here is you find your tether, you tether your magic to that other person, and your magic becomes stronger and stuff, and they become part of your family community. Sometimes they end up also being a love interest, but sometimes they're just a very close friend that you work with and who you do your magic with. And we're following our main character whose family has a hereditary curse where one person at a time just has the curse of basically magic, it'll hurt anyone that tries and does magic with them. So she's basically like a sort of, big no-no in the debutante season. No one wants to go near her, no one wants to tether their magic to hers because they're going to become ill as a result. But similar to series 1 of Bridgerton, you've got the sort of main girl that people are starting to not want anything to do with, and you've got the main guy who, everyone's kind of like, trying to fixate on a little bit, and he just wants to be left alone. So they agree to pretend to magically court one another to get everyone off their backs, and and it kind of all goes from there, really. And they start to uncover some sort of like interesting mysteries and stuff that are going on. There's witches that are dying, turning up all over the place and stuff like that. And they start to realise how it actually is starting to affect them at their house, in their homes, in their families and stuff like that. The plot twist? The main guy is the descendant of the person who cursed her family. So their families don't like each other. So the fact that they're also doing this is just so much fun. I feel like I'm really not selling this well. I love this book so much. It was fun. It was familiar while still being unique. I liked that the one thing that you read romances for is you know where the romance is going to go. So it's comforting, but also because you've got all the other plot elements that you don't know where they're going, it's still mysterious and tense, and you don't know where it's going. It was just so much fun, and I really, really, really enjoyed this book. I cannot wait for the sequel. It was just, like I said, YA is a hit or a miss for me, and this was a massive hit. I kind of continued with my YA kick that I was on, and I read The Proof of Vesuvius that I received from the publishers. This is a book that's coming out next month, following Felix and Lauren, who are two teenagers living in Pompeii. Well, Lauren is a acolyte at the Temple of Isis, and Felix has recently found himself in Pompeii. He steals a helmet and soon finds out that was really not a good idea to do, because he's now got the attention of a lot of people in the city, as well as potentially some of the gods. And Lauren has been basically plagued with visions of destruction and fire, and at the centre of it is Felix. So when Felix crosses his path and Lauren recognises him as the boy from the visions that have been haunting him for years, he decides he's not letting that motherfucker out of his sight until he works out what the hell's going on here and how he can stop the imminent destruction. I wonder what that could be in a book called Vesuvius. This book is just so good. It kind of is almost like that one episode of Doctor Who, but make it YA and add a little teen romance into it and stuff. It's very fun. It's very interesting. The historical aspects of it are just really, really well done. And one thing I find really interesting with things that take place in sort of, well-known historical disasters, it's that overlying tension of, what's coming, they don't, and then you're just like stressed the entire book, but like in a good way. Really, really interestingly done. I felt the characters of Felix and Lauren are really well written. Like, you completely understand their motivations and what drives them, and also just who they are as people, why they're like lonely and alone and stuff, and then also why they kind of form this bond with one another and stuff like that. it's just so easy to read, and they're so easy to root for, both as characters and as a couple, and the way everything is developed and the stuff, and the way, oh gosh, I have so many thoughts on this book, and it's really hard to talk about without talking about spoilers. I might have to do a full review on this. Like, just, oh, it was just brilliant, and you know, I really, really, really loved it. Like, the characters really were it for me. The pacing and the plot were just spot on. I do feel like almost like the aftermath and the epilogues just kind of went on a little bit too long, but I did like the way it rounded out the story. So just overall, brilliant, brilliant book. I believe that the UK cover looks like this, so just absolutely gorgeous. Um, yeah, so excited to see this hit shelves. And then read the reappearance of Rachel Price. This is by the same author who wrote A Good Girl's Guide to Murder, one of my favourite book series. This follows our main character, Belle, whose mother went missing when she was just a baby, and just at a time when her family really needs money to look after her grandfather. They agree to do a sort of true crime documentary to talk about the disappearance of her mother and what happened there and things. And whilst they're in the middle of doing this, her mother turns up, and everything really goes from there. This was really, really interesting. Similar, I would almost say, to Good Girl's Guide to Murder, with its overarching theme of women and women in society and women's rights and things like that. Like, if you see my Good Girl's Guide to Murder series review, you'll kind of know what I'm talking about. But I feel like that theme almost like continues on here, of women working within the, or women doing what they can with a system rigged against them. And that's all I'm going to say on the matter, because it kind of almost is spoilers even just to tell you that. But it was just so good. I feel like I really liked the true crime style of the book as a whole, you know, because it's a true crime sort of, you know, documentary that kind of kicks it off. I like that the format of the book almost feels very true crimey, with our main characters while filming things and stuff, almost for the documentary, just to try and like prove that it's all happening and have a paper trail and a video trail of everything that she's uncovering. Yeah, the plot twist was incredible. The pacing, the characters, the mystery, just all. I was so hooked. I could not put this book down, and I'm just, yeah. I think Holly Jackson has become a author author for me. I don't know what I've done with my copy, but then I read A Language of Dragons, which is basically almost like The Imitation Game, but with dragons. It's very, very cool, very interesting concept. You've got our main character whose parents are arrested for being rebels, and as a result, she ends up agreeing to go and try and crack this sort of secret dragon code, because she's a translator. She speaks many dragon languages, in exchange for her family's safety. You're set in a world that is a very strict class system. You have first class, second class, and third class. Our main character is second class, and the only thing keeping her in that second class and from third class, which is basically just straight up poverty, is good grades and a university application and things like that. From the get-go, you know that our main character is not like the greatest person ever. She is so flawed, but she knows this, and you also completely understand why she makes the decisions that she makes. Like, one thing I really love about this book is like how good the characterization is of our main character, how she is both likable and unlikable at the same time, but she has so much room for growth, and boy does she grow throughout this book. I thought the entire cast of characters was really, really interesting. I thought they were diverse. I thought they were all really fun. It was interesting to see their different interactions and things like that. I wasn't too big on the main central romance and stuff, but it did add something interesting to the book, and I did like where it went in the end. I did like how our romance, our love interest, sort of challenged our main character and got her to sort of really question the ideas that she has been brought up believing in the system that she grew up in. Yeah, overall just really, really good, really interesting concept of basically Bletchley Park but with dragons. And yeah, very interested to see where the series goes, where we see the community of, you know, because like dragons and humans live together and stuff, but there's also like societal and class things almost between them, as well as class and society things in their own hierarchies and stuff like that. Just really, really, really strong world building and really interesting ideas. Because I feel like with dragons, you know, they're almost like not an overused aspect in fantasy, but I would say almost overused. But what I'm really loving is like seeing so many different authors have their own takes on the creatures and have their own ideas on how to on just how to develop them and how they exist within this world. And I'm really loving seeing the diversity that's coming out of the fantasy genre right now with dragons. Yeah, I really really enjoyed Language of Dragons. It was another huge hit for me, and I going to stop talking now. Rather a lot of books I've read over the last couple of months. I have enjoyed most of them, to be honest, so I'm kind of on a bit of a high. Yeah, have you read any of these? Have you not? Any ones that take your interest that you want to ask more questions about? Feel free to leave a comment below. What did you read in March and April? Do let me know. If there's anything I've read, I will definitely want to talk to you about it. But yeah, I will stop talking now. That's it from me. I'll see you next month.